Scott, I want to go into communities. What can communities do? But right before we get there, I know you and Sarah have been working on this book, The Gathering Storm, to warn local communities to kind of give them some insight on what's coming in what they can do, at the local level. But it sounds like some of the other stuff that you guys covered in that book is dissecting some of the other acts of terrorism that we've seen throughout the globe, Mumbai, the Russian Mall, October 7th.
Yep.
When you dissected those with your counterparts, what are some of the commonalities and some of the things that you found?
Well, it started when you and I were talking about, you asked a question about, okay, so what do communities do? And that, you and I went back and forth on it a little bit, but what it really opened up was a really broad conversation that's still ongoing, where individuals and communities, I know they started hitting you up, they started hitting me up, they started hitting Sarah up. What do we do in our community? How do we defend our synagogue or our church or our place of worship? Is this something we should be thinking about? And we talked about it, and just the way I look at it is I believe we're at a crossroads right now. When we think about everything that we talked about here today, you look at the threat picture that the government has on terrorism. You look at what the Global War on Terror veterans are saying, and it's different. And we're at a crossroads. And you either believe at this point that there is a viable threat against the homeland that is complex, local, distributed, looks more like October 7 than it does 9/11, that is very likely in the next year or two, or you don't, And if you don't, okay, Godspeed. But if you do, where we were, okay, then perhaps in addition to the analysis, we should start until we do bring this together with our government, which we've really got to have that private-public relationship on an unprecedented scale. What could we, if it's a duty to warn up, maybe it's a duty to prepare down and in, and how could we help that conversation? So we started looking at, what if we just self-published a book that really just looked at not just the threat analysis, but scenarios that have happened in the past of where we get hit or other places get hit where they live, work, and play. And so we put together this small book, and borrowing from Winston Churchill when he tried to warn of the gathering storm in World War II. That's what we named this project, The Gathering Storm. And we just looked at, and so for my part in it and a couple other contributors, we looked at case studies. So a lot like how U.S. Army Special Ops Command and others do case studies, and they'll migrate those practical lessons learned into operators' modern times. That's what we did. And we just looked at unclassified. We looked at the DC sniper. We looked at the Bedlin school siege with the Chechens, where they moved children, over 1,000, into a gymnasium and threw explosives up on the basketball goals and held terrain and held the Russian special ops at bay. We looked at Mumbai, which is a very compelling version of what Sarah and others have warned about in 2008, where, roughly 10 terrorists locked down a city of 19 million. Doing complex attacks, holding terrain, killing well over 100 people. And it was almost a foreshadowing of what we think we could expect here in the homeland. And we October 7, New Orleans. So we looked at all these, and what we did was we started to pull out a lot of the commonalities that individuals and communities should be thinking about. And I'll kind of throw it back to you there, and we can go deeper on any of those things that you want, because there were a lot of lessons learned, I think, that are super helpful. But one of the things that we came out of it with, Sean, that surprised me was, one, the relative ease of finding people who were on the ground or who responded to those events. Even Mumbai, October 7, just doing peer-to-peer discussions on lessons learned was super eye-opening, and I think something that's available to law enforcement, emergency operations centers across the country. That's number one. And number two, I think the thing that surprised me was we came up with a lot more questions than we did answers. And just like yesterday when we were talking to the sheriff's department in your county, it's different in every county. It's different in every municipality, because context is everything. But if these attacks are going to be locally manifested, then that's where the conversations need to start, because that's going to be the real resilience in that. So we came away with a lot of questions, and where we didn't have the answers, we just put the questions in there. Here's what communities should be asking themselves, and hopefully more books will be written. that are, technically specific on those questions, and we just keep it going. So that's the project, and happy to jump into any parts about it. Because like I said, between the Intel contributors and the operators, that a lot of good stuff came out of it, a lot of lessons.
What are some of the top lessons? Without dissecting all of it, what are some of the top lessons?
I would say probably at an individual level, the first thing is, to do your own research, to not let fear dominate, but to question things, to question what we're saying, to look at a lot of these case studies, to look at a lot of the examples on your own. I think that for you and your family, this is not just terrorism. This is any crisis, but certainly for terrorism, I think you should look at the threat itself, and then you should look at scenarios that have been similar to that. And between those two things, you can derive a lot of insights on kind of what you should be doing. Some of the preparation things that came out of it were thinking about how would these scenarios unfold? Like, look at your daily pattern of life. What are the local cafes that you go to? Where is your local movie theater? Where's your daycare? Where do your kids go to school? What are the gatherings that you typically go to throughout the year? Do you go to a lot of concerts? Do you go to ball games? And I think starting to just look at those with intention and starting to ask yourself hard questions about, okay, if I looked at, for example, the Nova Music Festival, I look at the Crocus City Music Hall where ISIS hit. What are things that I can derive from that I could look at the places that I go to is there actually a security plan here? If not, who should I be talking to about this? Can we get the community together to talk about this? Should I go engage local law enforcement and call a community meeting? So I think my big takeaway for individuals is look at the scenarios that have already happened, because that takes the fear away, I think, and really puts agency back in ourselves to just look pragmatically at things that have happened in the past.
Well, thank you guys for the briefing yesterday. I mean, we went to my local sheriff, very receptive. I was really happy with how that went. I want to do everything I can to protect the community that I live in and all the kids and the people who live here. And they seemed very receptive. There was my county's police, or my city's police department, the county sheriff's office, neighboring PDs. And then we even had, quite a different federal agencies and state agencies in there. Department of Higher Education was in there. And I think, back to you, what are the questions? I mean, I think that's how you start the discussion, is you come up, at least that's how we did it in special operations.
100%.
You have to put yourself in the terrorist mindset of how would they do this? If I wanted to strike terror, hit multiple targets, kill as many people as possible, how would I do it?
Yeah.
And so what are some of the questions that communities should be asking?
Right. So here's a couple, and again, what I found to be extremely useful was bringing in, just in special forces, and I know you guys did this in the teams as well. So before you go down range, and this is both post and pre 9/11, but before you go down range, you would usually go over and meet with, the team or the platoon that just got back. You'd sit down with them. Our engineer sergeant would sit with the engineer sergeant. I would sit with the detachment commander. The intel guys would sit together. They would do, one-on-one debriefs of what they saw, and the incoming guys would take notes. And then we'd do kind of a collective thing. And it just was what you did. But I think you can migrate that same thing. You can bring in, for example, Doron Kaidar, an Israeli Special Forces NCO from the IDF, is traveling around the U.S. right now talking to churches about his lessons learned from responding October 7th. He was at the Nova Music Festival. He went into those neighborhoods that were slaughtered. And so he can give you really, really insights into, if you subscribe to the notion that could happen here and is somewhat imminent, then he can tell you the things that he saw. Then you derive questions such as, how would we handle in this county an incident where groups of 8 to 10 well-trained terror operatives donned first responder uniforms? How would we handle that as a community?
Wow.
How would we communicate that to a community? How would first responders actually talk to themselves on the fact that that was happening? And is there a way that they could overcome that with a different uniform or something? Like, I don't know the answer, but that is a legitimate question, right? Another question that came up a lot that I think is really powerful is how would our community to respond if the terror attack happened in such a way that there was complete paralysis across all first responders? If you had systemic paralysis in all of my case study interviews, you had systemic paralysis for at least 24 to 48 hours where there was no real response. So
Why was that?
Well, because they were just overwhelmed. In some cases, they were targeted. In October 7, first responders, they ran right at them and they took them out. And so they were not, and then you had reinforcements coming. There was so much confusion. Plus you had the terror groups actually in first responder uniforms, right? So it was just complete chaos. And so and then some areas were cut off where they held terrain. Like in Mumbai, they held terrain. In Bedouin school, they put basketball goals with explosives on them and the children in the middle. How are you going to assault that? So these are the things that just by looking at the scenarios, it's just, you know what it is? It's so hard to look at, in my assessment. I mean, I was sitting across from this Special Forces soldier who responded to October 7, and he could barely form a coherent sentence. He was so upset. And this is a guy that's been operating for decades, and he couldn't even speak because of what he'd seen. It's so hard to look at. But honestly, I don't know how we can avoid that, but if we can start to derive some really, really poignant questions. And we put a ton of them in the book. But those are some of the ones that came up.
Yeah, and some other really interesting points is, right, we know, at least from the training in Afghanistan, what pieces of it'll look like, right? So there's one piece kind of also pulled from Mumbai is the idea of these like attackers who fight to the death, right? Because it's not like in Israel, you'll go and do an attack, you can grab, kidnap someone and leave and go back into Gaza. When they come in the United States, they're here to do the attack and they're here to die, right? There's no exit plan, right? So now we need to talk to law enforcement, like, what's it like to fight someone who wants to fight to the death? And how do we learn that? Okay, we go into our community, we talk to people who fought in Ramadi, in Fallujah, bring them in, have them talk, be consultants, advisors, tell us what it was like to fight that enemy. We can do that. Another really big piece is suicide bombers, right? That they plan to do suicide bombings here. Well, what do we need to learn about suicide bombings? Because we don't have suicide bombings in our community, even simple things. What kind of standoff should we just have from a metal detector? We should start those standoffs now, right? Because then if the bomber gets freaked out, blows up, you save lives just by putting a standoff going up to the metal detector. So if we start understanding these things, we can put little things in place that do save lives.
And I interviewed several intelligence analysts from the IDF, and I just asked them, at the end, I said, what would you say to American analysts, law enforcement? And 4 separate ones that I interviewed, they all, first of all, they sat there for like an uncomfortable period of time. Like you could tell they were wanting to say something, and then finally they were just like, fuck it, I'm gonna say it. And what they said was essentially, we live this every day. Like we live this in our communities. We're always facing this imminent threat. It's something that we've kind of come to terms with. And we were completely caught off guard. Like we were not ready for this. We were not ready for what came our way. And they came across, they came across the border and then they went back. They said to me, you all have not even allowed yourself to even think about this. They have been among you for 4 years. It is going to be 10x what they did to us on October 7th. To the man and the woman, they said that. And they all were separate interviews.
Wow.
And when Al-Qaeda planned this, remember the Hamas attacks they were involved in planning, they planned the U.S. Homeland attack to be 10 times the size of the Hamas attacks. To them, the Hamas attacks was the dress rehearsal. So we have to remember the attack on us is going to be a lot larger.
And again, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But it's just all of the different points. It's the different points of interviews that I've conducted, including with these case studies. And if you even just consider the fact that one law enforcement officer that does a lot of tactical training around the country, He watches your show diligently, and he contacted me and he said, Scott, I train all over the country. I train SWAT teams, advanced tactics. He said, I'm telling you right now, we're not ready for this in terms of response, primarily because the typical scenario that we deal with are single shooters.
Yep. One active shooter.
We do not deal with teams of 8 to 10 that are prepared to fight to the death. In Mumbai, for example, in 2008, there were 35 candidates that tried out that were initially groomed for the role. 10 were selected. 9 of the 10 fought to the death. They knew that they were not coming out. Right. And so we've just never faced anything with that. And then if you look at, for example, the Crocus City Music Hall or the Crocus Music Hall just recently where ISIS hit in Russia, that was a complex attack where they had incendiary devices. They set the place ablaze. They were extremely well armed with long guns and short guns, grenades, and they were taking the time to cut throats as they went, and making sure that it was covered and amplified. So you're talking about extremely well-trained individuals who are prepared to die and who frankly know what they're doing. And we don't think about that. We don't train that way. And I'm not saying that to create panic. I'm saying that's just a pragmatic responsibility that in this day and age that we live in, and particularly considering our border's been open for 4 years, how could we assume that has not happened? I mean, even if you didn't have the GWAT veteran reporting that you have, knowing the mandate that groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda have against our, demise, like, why would we not assume that number of people are here prepared to do that? I mean,
we've seen how effective the training is. I mean, the last time Sarah was on, she gave us a clip. We'll roll it again right now. But I mean, in my 14 years of being over there, I've never seen a combatant move like that or shoot like that. And, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and then another really interesting thing when he brings up the ISIS Russia attack. So they trained multiple teams for that attack. And the first team essentially got thwarted and wrapped up. So the Russians thought they stopped the plot. And then those guys came in and basically did that attack, which is very smart. And we're not used to those kind of tactics. Backup teams for these plots. That's a new thing. So we can even have people in the government, and we do have people they picked up 8 ISIS guys last year and think they thwarted the Homeland plot. So the terrorists are also doing things to make you think, okay, you're ahead of the game. You stop this. And then they had a whole backup team that went in and successfully did that attack.
And I think you have to think about, I'll just say this real quick. It's just, we have to assume, I think another thing is strategic surprise. If you look at, if you just study these groups, they are very good at not just tactical surprise, but strategic surprise, where they surprise the nation. They surprise the larger body at scale. And when that happens, what follows is a level of institutional paralysis. Everything's locked, everything's paralyzed, and so when that happens, you've got these groups that are capable of what my buddy Dave at the agency calls not terrorism, but horrorism. They're able to bring a level of just unmitigated horror at an interpersonal level, and then they'll even amplify it with body cams. So you're not, it's strategic surprise, strategic paralysis, hold ground, mass casualties, that kind of event. We've just never dealt with that here, and I think we're due. I just do. I don't think that you're going to see, one law enforcement officer that I interviewed told me, he said, I was in DC for the 9/11 attack. He said I was 2 blocks from the Pentagon. Right. And he said, that attack happened, explosion, F-16s flying supersonic just above the treetops. And right over here, the McDonald's was still open. People are still getting food, but yet when the DC sniper, 2 dudes in the back of a car for 3 weeks, he was there for that too. The entire city was paralyzed and locked down. People on a knee getting gas, kids not going outside to play. And he said, that's the difference. That's the difference is when there's the spectacular thing that's over there, but then there's where you live and you work and you play. And they have figured that out. If you look at their attacks over the last, 10 years, every single time, it's local, complex attacks right where we live, work, and play.
That while you guys were talking, you mentioned the video of the Taliban fighters who are on the range showing their tactics, showing off their tactics. A few things you should know about them, Sean. They were trained, most of them were trained by the U.S. Special Operations Community while we were there. Some were evacuated to the United States by the Biden administration, and then they decided to go back. They decided to go back and join the Taliban. So some of those guys you see, they're the returnees. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they get debriefed. They get briefed all over again by the Taliban, by Haqqani, and are sent back to the United States. So don't think that that individual you see in the range is only in Afghanistan. No, they're going back and forth. There are Afghan Americans from California, from Tennessee, from Florida, from New Jersey, New York, that have went back and joined the Taliban, that are serving with the Taliban right now. And these folks go back and forth.
You know, I know you briefed a couple governors, you briefed local PDs, sheriff's offices, I don't know who else, but you know, one of the things, and I don't know if this came out of this or not, what you guys are doing, but it's like Florida seems to be kind of leading the way with this. They've set up the National Guard Special Missions Unit, where they've utilized a lot of special operations veterans is kind of like a volunteer special unit task force, special missions unit task force, and so I'm hoping they do that here. Are you guys getting any? I mean, that just seems like a great way because even yesterday during the briefing, it was allocation of resources seemed to be like the primary concern, right? Yeah. And how are they gonna? I mean, and that's something that all these communities need to be thinking about. Is look, police are already understaffed,
right?
Because the last 4 years, the defund the police thing, and so you really, PDs, sheriff's offices, even at the federal, state levels, they need to be thinking about allocation of resources and how fast those resources are going to be used up. And so you need to be thinking about neighboring PDs, neighboring sheriff's offices, state assets, federal assets, and how we can help each other.
Yeah. Yeah. You can even look at, so for example, some of the things that we looked at were like Western North Carolina hurricane. The chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio. Like those are not terror events, but what they were situations where a crisis expended the capability of the organic response force in minutes. Like that, they couldn't respond. They were not effective. And so what you saw were individuals and communities that were on their own. And then you also saw, and this is what I call the GWAT X factor, right? You saw these global war on terror individuals responding, either from the local area or even trucking in and responding. And it started with the Afghanistan collapse, but it's been happening, the fires in West Maui, the Western North Carolina hurricanes. So there's kind of some new stuff that's happening. And I guess where I'm going with that, Sean, is that I think we have to look at this level of threat. And it's kind of like I said, you either believe it's real or you don't. If you do, then you have to give it its credit and give the enemy a vote that this thing will massively exceed our organic capabilities within minutes. And if that's the case, then I think we have to have a paradigm shift in our private public partnership. The government and the communities, the government at all levels, and the communities have to work together on a scale we've never done before. And that we usually only do after bang. I'm saying, and this is why I think Sarah's sense of urgency is so compelling, there's just not a lot of time. I think we have to assume that the 4 years of an open border, eye off the ball, like there's such an advance to us of where we are. So a lot of this is how do we plan together? How do we work together? How do we look at global war on terror veterans being a part of this? You talked about the Florida piece, and I don't think you'll mind me saying this. Like, Sheriff Naco is in Pasco County is really good at engaging local veterans and not just for their analytical skills on the intel side, but also their operational skills. Like Sarah said, they fought in Ramadi, they fought in Fallujah. They know how to do a threat vulnerability assessment of schools. So I just think it's kind of all hands on deck, man, honestly. But the asset that we have that we are not properly utilizing our communities. Our communities have a lot of potential. The top-down government has got to figure that out. They've got to include them in the discussion, and I think it's the best last chance we have.
I mean, GWAT veterans are, I mean, you've already covered this several times just on this specific show, but very open to help. They want to help. And so yesterday in the briefing, you had brought up, expect blockades, expect not to be able to reach the venues. And so, you know, and I had brought up, hey, like, you know, I understand you guys, you know, you don't have all the resources that you need, but you can utilize the local community. I mean, I brought it up, you know, when I was in the SEAL teams in 2004, 16 guys, you know, 16 guys went into Athens, and we developed 5 routes into every Olympic venue in Athens, outside of Athens, how we would get there. And not only that, I mean, guys that have done the job, you know, I mean, how many times were you infilling a target, it was blocked, and then you had to deviate, find another route in? I mean, we're really good at this type of stuff. And so even if you can't allocate your officers to develop that plan, you can reach out to the community, have your community find the qualified people within the community. They're out there. There's a ton of them here, you know, to develop just the routes. And I mean, and I know you're saying like, we don't have time. It's going to take time,
It will.
you know, and you have to start somewhere. So I don't want it to seem like it's an impossible task. I mean, I think the important thing is just start.
I think it's just
start utilizing the community, develop the routes. You had talked about the communication piece and that it would be very likely there would be no comms. You know, well, immediately I brought up, hey, you can get comms, order some mini Starlinks, and at least you have communication from on site where the attack happened to headquarters, to the sheriff's department, to the PD, to whatever, you know, and that's right there. You have open comms.
And this is why we did the Gathering Storm book the way we did, is because like exactly what you're doing is the way we present it. So we like pose these questions and like, how can your community come together and start addressing these? I mean, look at how you arrived at that solution based on tactical experience where? In Athens. Mm-hmm. But that's all over the country. I mean, look at what the GWAT guys and girls did in the response to Western North Carolina. I was just up there interviewing a lady named Pastor Glenda, and she ministers to 2 congregations way up in the mountains where my family's from. And we went up there and we're going around, and I asked her, I said, what was support like in the first 2 weeks and it was devastating. She said, had it not been for the veterans, we wouldn't even have had food resupply. In the first 2 weeks. It was the only people we saw from the outside were veterans, and somehow they got to us. You know, and my point is that is going to happen no matter what. These GWAT veterans, they have spent 20 years of their life doing this kind of work in a distributed, connected kind of way, and they're going to do it no matter what. If there's institutional paralysis, if there's a gap, they're going to fill it. So why not, on your table exercises at a community level in the EOC, invite them in, huddle around the table and make it a true private public conversation around a community problem, you know? And I just think that nothing but goodness is going to come out of that. Like what you facilitated yesterday in my assessment is exactly the model of what we need.
Well, it gets people thinking. And so I kind of just want to go over everything that we talked about there yesterday, like not only allocation of actual personnel, but resources, medical supplies.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah and Boone just did a big event at a local church here where sounds like not even just local churches within this county were here, but all throughout the state came to listen to them speak. And so there are a lot of people that are taking this seriously and they just, you know, they might not know the questions to ask. I mean, you go to a church down here, everybody's packing heat. I mean, everybody's armed, everybody's packing heat, but you know, do they understand basic medical skills.
Right.
Even just slapping a tourniquet on, and so maybe PDs, I don't know who would fund it. But instead of, EMS is probably going to have even a tougher time getting there to triage and treat victims and casualties.
Yeah.
And so that
They
means
won't be able to. Remember, they have to wait till the scene is clear of a threat. So
even
we have to
after
remember
that,
that.
even after though, there's going to be traffic jams, roads are going to be blocked. Even if they didn't block the attack, they're going to, there's going to be traffic jams where you can't move because everybody's going to be in paralysis. And so even if it's just, hey, let's get 100 tourniquets and stash them in different churches. Let's get 100, or chest seals or bandages, all that kind of stuff. Because even if EMS doesn't arrive, guess what? There's going to be medical professionals there that are survivors that will be able to treat. And if that communication can even just come out, because it's not 100% the comms are going to be shut down, but if the department, if they get a call and they say, hey, by the way, there's an entire medical cache of supplies stashed wherever in the janitor closet at a mall, or maybe you make it just open, just like they do with AEDs and that type of equipment. Hey, here's the medical supplies. We can't get there. Roads are blocked. You guys, we set up for this.
And it's really, it's absolutely. And it's not that hard to do because you can actually have these conversations. And I've sat in and participated in quite a few of them. And you don't see people in there panicking or wringing their hands. You see empowered neighbors just having a pragmatic conversation about a potential threat. But guess what? The worst thing that's going to happen probably if you go through that exercise is A, you're going to be connected more to your neighbor. And B, you're probably going to be ready for other contingencies that might happen. And I'll give you a case in point. I was interviewing some EOC representatives who responded to a flood in Ohio. They never saw it coming. It crested over its banks more than it had ever flooded. A little bitty town, like 20,000 people. And one of the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center members, was telling me that it was flooding so bad that they brought in firefighters from all over the surrounding counties, right, to come help. Well, they were doing boat rescue. So they all brought their boats, but none of their radios communicated to each other. So they had to put one fire department guy from the town in each boat so that they had a radio that worked. And it took them a long time to figure that out, but that was the solution they came up. The point was, had you just done an exercise ahead of time where you brought those folks together, you would have already sorted that out, right? And those are the kinds of things that when you add to the paralysis, just the horrorism that could be brought by this. Trying to solve a problem like that could take you days because of the trauma and just the inability to function and move. So I just think that the more that a lot of it is the communities coming together, again, private, public. It's got to be private sector too. It's got to be those GWAT veterans. It's got to be members of the community that normally maybe wouldn't be in there, and finding ways to talk left of bang. That's the critical part, because right of bang, everybody's going to be well-intended and coming together, but zero capability. You build trust when risk is low. You leverage it when the stakes are high.
And then even just training, and I'm not talking about high tactics, clearing rooms, that kind of stuff. If you're a community leader, if you're a minister, if you're a pastor, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, if you're a manager of a Publix, a grocery store, a little bit of medical training can go a very, very long way. And there's always people that are interested in doing this. Especially churches here, very involved in this stuff. Covenant shooting not too long ago just happened. There was another one in Antioch just happened a couple months ago, and people are tuned in right now.
Yeah.
And so use that.
Yeah. 100%.
Get your people trained up. At least it's that can mean life or death for a whole number of people.
And there's actually an amazing case study. If you actually look at the Las Vegas shooting where we lost, of course, hundreds of lives, they say 70% of the people who survived because the people in their vicinity had first aid training, and a lot of it was former military members.
Interesting.
But those citizens stepped up and did the initial triage and the initial aid, and it saved 70% of those people. I mean, that's a huge number, and that alone should just get communities involved. Hey, if we know how to do this, look at the number of lives you save.
And again, to that, just a couple other lessons learned from that same event, right? A concert, the Route 19 Harvest Festival or Route 91 Harvest Festival, tens of thousands of people, single shooter from the Mandalay Hotel, right? I forget however many weapons he had. It was more than 10 with bump stocks. But while he was doing that, it took police over an hour to get into his room, and he was already dead. An hour, single shooter. So again, if you just look at the level of paralysis that happens from that, you add to that 7 to 8, 10 well-trained operatives like you saw in that video, right? Who then hit multiple nodes at one time and who have a pre-existing mandate to hold terrain with explosives and children at a school. But if you're not tabletopping that, if we're not laying that on a tabletop exercise and SWAT teams talking through that with, others and what would we do if there were 2 locations that were locked down with hostages? Mm-hmm. I mean, you've exceeded scope and capacity immediately. So, how are you calling for, what does that look like? So I just think that, and these are just, you need the other thing that came out of this, Sean, we talked about yesterday. I believe every emergency operations center, county sheriff should have a red cell. They should have a red cell. What's going on, teammates? I know with everything that's happening in the world right now, you feel compelled to protect and look after the people in your charge, especially if you're a leader at the state or local or community level, or even for your family. Everything that's going on right now, it's tough to feel like you can protect the people you love with all of the stuff going on with terrorism, the emerging threat, the gathering storm that we keep hearing about that's come out of the way that we left Afghanistan, and that now is looking like it could actually manifest as another October 7 style attack on our own shores. We've heard the FBI director talk about it. We've heard the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, talk about it. You certainly hear folks like Sarah Adams and others talk about it on the Sean Ryan show. This notion that an attack where we live, work, and play by violent extremists like we saw on October 7, like we saw in Mumbai, could very well happen in our communities. And that's a terrifying thing. It can leave you feeling isolated, frustrated, wondering, what do I do? And the fact of the matter is, the people that you protect, the people that count on you for that safety, shouldn't pay that penalty because you're not sure what move to make. And I know exactly what that feels like. When we betrayed our allies, our Afghan allies, in the summer of 2021, I had that same upside down feeling. And what I will tell you on the other side of that, even as we brought this network together of former Green Berets and special operators and intelligence alumni and started helping our allies either hide from the Taliban or make their way, our allies make it to the United States and Europe, we started getting access to some really powerful information about the threat and this storm that's gathering. And over the last 4 years, a lot of these global war on terror veteran volunteers, in their relationships and partnership with former allies, have developed a threat picture that is staggering, it's terrifying, but it's also something that we can get in front of. We don't have to just accept it as our fate. And even though right now the federal government is doing literally nothing about it, they've got their heads in the sand on this thing, because it's likely going to happen at state and local levels, there's no reason that state and local leaders can't inform themselves and start to gather information about this gathering storm from the global war on terror veterans that are talking to these individuals. And at Task Force Pineapple, that is something that we are really focused on right now, is to help you as a state and local community leader become more clear on what's happening with this gathering storm. And I'm excited to tell you that we have been just swarming on a product that we're going to push out called the Gathering Storm. And it's available. You can go ahead now and pre-order it. And the way we're doing it is through donations. We actually need help to get this Gathering Storm project fully out the door, because the idea is we want to put the book in as many hands as we can, as an ebook, as a written copy, but we also want to be able to do presentations with state and local leaders, with community leaders, with religious institutions. We'll do some of them in person, we'll do some of them remote, via video like this. But that's a heavy lift for a handful of global war on terror veterans in a 501c3 nonprofit. So we could use your help. If you're looking for a way to get involved in 2025, and so many of you have reached out to me, how do I make a difference? It's very simple. Go to the website below, and with a $25 donation, not only do those proceeds go right into Task Force Pineapple to help us with the Gathering Storm project, but you can secure an advanced copy of the Gathering Storm. So it's a double win right there. Here's the thing. We're kind of at a crossroads right now as we go into this new period. And, there's the option of doing nothing. And if you do that, then just know that you're relying on those same top-down institutions that have had their head in the sand for 4 years. What kind of information are you going to get, right? Or you can start to exercise some agency in your own life and connect with this broader network of Task Force Pineapple and others that are really working to get this information out there and just to drop the barriers and share it. It's unclassified information that you need to know about where you live, work, and play, and how to secure it. So just imagine what that can do for your peace of mind, what that can do for how you stabilize your community, how you work with your neighbors on this, and calmly approach a way that we can protect those that we love. And so my ask of you, again, is to go from being uninformed to informed. Go from feeling frustrated to prepare. And the way to do that is to click the link below, donate $25, and secure your advanced copy of the Gathering Storm. Thanks for what you do, and I'll see you on the rooftop.